And our legislation is very narrow. It simply addresses that commitment that was made to our region and to Congress last December.
It's becoming increasingly difficult for utilities to plan and forecast what their rates are going to look like and what their costs are going to look like to help ensure that their rates remain affordable for the communities that they serve. This is just really, really critically important right now.
When these prices of energy and other things start to go up, something has to be cut, and it's normally not something we want our people to go without.
Welcome back to DAM, the official podcast of Northwest Hydropower. I'm your host, Austin Rohr, and I manage all things communications here at Northwest RiverPartners. On this episode, we're going to be setting the story straight. Recently, as you may have seen, we released a statement to address misinformation we've seen circulating that grossly mischaracterizes a bipartisan effort to protect Northwest energy customers from rising costs, an effort that Northwest RiverPartners and others have worked incredibly hard to put forth. I don't throw around these words and accusations lightly, especially in today's online and highly politicized world. They carry a lot of strong connotations. However, we have to call it like it is, and what we saw did not represent the truth. In addition to putting together a statement that we published across social media, we wanted to use our podcasting platform to dive even deeper. And rather than talking with one guest, as we so often do, we decided the best approach would be to capture a handful of perspectives to tell the whole story. On this special episode of DAM, you'll hear from Northwest RiverPartners Executive Director Clark Mather, Flathead Electric Cooperative's Director of External Affairs and Energy Services, Katie Pfennigs, and lastly, Chris Sidmore, Executive Director of the Flathead Food Bank. Each will share a unique perspective on rising costs and the important work of meeting those costs head on. Stay tuned to the end as well, as we'll provide some important resources that you won't want to miss out on. Without further ado, enjoy the episode. So, Clark, thanks for coming back on DAM. It's your second appearance now here since you joined us as Executive Director and introduced yourself to our listeners. We're here doing something a little bit different than normal today, taking a little bit of a different approach and a different format to the podcast. And so we're opening up this episode by talking to you primarily to give our listeners context for this cost cap legislation and the language that we've worked on around that, and explain what it is, why it exists, and I think why it's important ultimately to our members. So let's start with what is cost cap? I mean, what does this phrase we keep throwing around really mean?
Yeah, Austin, it's great to be back with you. So basically, our legislation is simply trying to keep the federal government's promise to the millions of people in our region from the agreement that the Biden administration entered into in December of 2023 to stay, that is, pause litigation for 5 years with an option for an additional 5-year stay for the longstanding litigation on the federal hydropower system. Our legislation simply tries to put in place a law that would keep that promise to cap additional fish and wildlife spending by the Bonneville Power Administration, and frankly, the millions of customers across the Northwest at $300 million. And that was the promise that was made to our members, particularly the consumer-owned utilities across the Northwest. But frankly, it was the promise that was made by the Biden administration to Congress. When I was working at my previous job at Tacoma Public Utilities, I was actually in D.C. the week the agreement was signed, and repeatedly we heard from a number of folks that the cost issue was dealt with because there was going to be there was language in the agreement on the cap. And when we read the agreement and commitments document, it seemed like the door was open to spend beyond that $300 million. And so we just think that promise to both Congress and the promise to the people of the Northwest is really, really important to keep. And our legislation is very narrow. It simply addresses that commitment that was made to our region and to Congress last December. So I'm really excited about the bipartisan support we've received on both sides of Congress. Our legislation has made good progress so far at this point in the congressional calendar, and we look forward to continuing our advocacy on that legislation. It's really important.
So, I mean, in other words, we didn't come up with this number. We're not the ones that are trying to kind of make this up as we go and find a way to make it somehow benefit us. I mean, this is just what was already agreed upon that we want to lock in place and ensure, like you said, that this promise is going to remain as committed to last year.
Yeah, exactly. And I just want to be clear about a couple of other things. So number one, the additional $300 million is frankly not the only money being spent in the Northwest on to mitigate the impacts of the hydropower system on various fish species and wildlife species in the river. Every year, the customers of the Pacific Northwest and of Bonneville, through their utilities, send something close to $650 to $700 million worth of value, not only in direct investment, but also additional spill that avoids power being available for customers around the region. Those numbers have totaled billions of dollars. I think it's approaching $20 billion over the course of that program. And we're seeing good results. I mean, in general, since the federal dams went into place, Bonneville first in 1938, it's the first federal dam on the system, and Lower Granite Dam being the most upriver dam on the Snake River system, we generally have seen fish returns go up. It's not to say that everything's perfect. In Northwest RiverPartners, I would say, has a proud history of working with a number of stakeholders, including Native American tribes, to support additional efforts on fish recovery. But I think it's important to remember that this $300 million is in addition to the spending that happens with customer dollars now, roughly 25% of the wholesale power costs that go from consumer-owned utilities to the Bonneville Power Administration, for a program that seems to be working well, and we want to continue tweaking as we move forward. I would just say, too, that as I've traveled around since the last time I did this podcast, the cost sensitivity on kind of, I would call it both ends of the spectrum, has really been crystallized for me. We have a number of customers, a number of our neighbors that are really struggling with the economic situation where we have been in. We have rising prices across the economy as the hydropower system has been increasingly spoken for. Power, there's a lot of upward pressure on rates. And people who are living on the economic edge are struggling to pay not only their electric bill, but the rest of their utility bills and their food costs and the additional costs that they're just dealing with at this particular point in our economy. So additional costs coming through fish and wildlife spending that's already, in addition to what is probably the largest fish and wildlife recovery program in the United States, if not the world, that has an impact on everybody, but particularly those people who are living on the economic edge, and we're very sensitive to that at RiverPartners. I would also say, too, that I think it impacts future economic development opportunities. There's been a lot of stories published recently about how the cost of power and other tax policies, but the cost of power, particularly clean energy like hydropower, will have an impact on the future development of a green hydrogen economy in the Pacific Northwest. We have a hydrogen hub, which some of our member states are part of, and that's really cool, and there's a huge economic opportunity there. But the price of electricity, particularly clean electricity like hydropower, will be a really fundamental part about whether those hydrogen developments take off or not. So again, we want to keep that promise. We're not asking for anything different than what was really in the agreement. It's not anything different than what was told to the Northwest. And our legislation simply and narrowly tries to keep that promise from that December agreement.
And when we say we, I know that we are speaking as Northwest RiverPartners, but we are a member-driven organization, and we have what I would say is very broad support from our membership, as well as that bipartisan support that you mentioned for keeping this promise intact. Would you say that the reasons you just listed are really the driving force behind why so many of our members in the public power space, as well as those outside of it, and a lot of the legislators we've been working with are getting behind this?
Yeah, I really appreciate you brought this up, because it has been a team effort. It has not just been Northwest RiverPartners. So when we put together a letter in the spring on this, we had in a very short period of time, we had more than 50 members sign on to a letter to Congress on this. A really good outpouring of support from utilities of all different shapes and sizes in the Pacific Northwest, the Washington Association of Wheat Growers, Schweitzer Engineering Labs, a good cross-section of our membership wanted to sign on because they know that in their communities or amongst their association that cost is a really big deal and they want to make sure those promises are kept. More broadly, there's been a whole group of trade associations, particularly from Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, that have been with us every step of the way and have advocated for this legislation, this bipartisan legislation, right along with us. And those organizations represent all sorts of utilities and organizations around the Northwest. And I'm very proud to say that we have stuck together as this process has moved along. And I'm excited about the prospects of our legislation. Passing any bill through Congress is hard. It's really, really hard. Congress has a lot of things on their plate all the time. And so I think the only way we've been able to get there and to have really good bipartisan support from across the Pacific Northwest in DC amongst our congressional delegation is the fact that we have a broad diversity of not only Northwest RiverPartners membership, but our shared members with other organizations, and then broader associations that have been great partners in this effort along the way.
The last thing we'll touch on here is that, as you mentioned, it's been a team effort. And I think that an important part of that team as well has been the everyday people we've been calling on as well, the public power customers that we've been asking to step up and, write in and support some of this stuff as well. So I know that maybe we're in a bit of a period where it might be hard to give them a specific call to action, but for those people that are listening out there right now, what would be the best way you would say to get behind this effort that we and these other organizations and utilities are trying to spearhead and make sure that we can put that pressure on Congress so that we can get this passed?
Yeah. So, and it's a really important point too, Austin. So, as we've had a chance to communicate with our broader lists of people in the Northwest that want to support hydropower, I've been really excited to see the very immediate response in terms of people who want to engage their member or members of Congress, their House member and their 2 senators, to support this legislation. So that has been really, really cool. We invite anybody to not only support us in terms of going to our website, nwriverpartners.org, Northwest River Partners, our website, and signing up for our list so you can get these updates, you can have the opportunity to engage, you can find out what's going on not only on this legislation, but what's going on in the broader conversation about reliable, affordable hydropower. And that engagement from people around the Northwest to show that there is really broad support. We know there's broad support for hydropower, but people are willing to take some of their precious time and write a letter to their elected official, I think is really, really powerful. So please keep that up if you've done that. Please join our list if you're not on it. And just stay in touch with us on this issue and a whole bunch of issues affecting hydropower here in the region.
Absolutely, and we will be providing resources for that at the end of the podcast as
Cool.
well. So if people don't know where to go to start, we'll make sure to provide some stuff there, and hopefully they'll stick around. We've got some really good guests that are going to be coming up in this episode as well to keep talking about this subject. So
It's exciting.
I really appreciate your time as well at making sure that we give people the context and the full background and understanding of what and why this is. And I think that we're going to do a good job here of telling the whole story and telling a very complete and truthful story. So excited for that for sure.
Yeah, Austin, thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for your work on the podcast.
Well, Katie, I really appreciate you making your return to DAM. Hopefully our listeners are familiar with you from your past appearance, and happy you made the time to come back on today and talk to us about this important issue.
Thank you very much. I'm always happy to be here talking about hydro.
It's our favorite subject to discuss on the podcast. So
Yes, it is.
for sure. So the subject of our conversation today is specifically this bipartisan legislative effort to ensure that a particular commitment within the December 14th settlement agreement between the U.S. government and plaintiff groups will spend no more than $300 million additional dollars of the Bonneville Power Administration's money on the recovery efforts outlined. And this comes on top of the significant amount of money that BPA spends on fish and wildlife already. There's a lot of broad support for this language among publicly owned utilities across the Northwest, and that includes those of our folks out in Montana. I'd love to just know from your perspective, why is it so important to Flathead Electric Cooperative to make sure that we codify this language and this commitment to spend no more than 300 million additional dollars?
Sure, that's a great question. The agreement overall was something that we were really concerned about from a cost of power standpoint from the get-go, and now that the agreement is in place, we really want to make sure that the exposure to our ratepayers is not only limited but also is known. As you read through that agreement, I read through the agreement, it just became very apparent that there are a lot of potential ways that the financial exposure to the people that we serve in Northwest Montana could be much larger than the $300 million in stated Bonneville Power Administration costs. And so this effort really helps us say, nope, that is what we agreed to or what Bonneville agreed to. And we want to make sure that it stays that way. And it's also what Congress was told would be the exposure to Bonneville ratepayers. So really, it's just a function of that promise being kept.
Yeah, I mean, from that perspective, I think, what we've tried to make sure is clear to folks is that we're not really necessarily putting anything new together here, and in a sense, just kind of trying to follow, I guess, the process that's necessary to make sure that what was already stated, like you said, what was already the commitment made, the promise that was made, just is backed by something sort of, binding in terms of making sure it's actually, a firm agreement rather than kind of a handshake type of thing.
Exactly. And I mean, obviously our industry is facing, many cost pressures. And, these increases are one of them. And so I think in an environment where it's becoming increasingly difficult for utilities to plan and forecast what their rates are going to look like and what their costs are going to look like, and to help ensure that their rates remain affordable for the communities that they serve. This is just really, really critically important right now.
We also learned recently from a trip out to visit you all and a lot of our other friends in the Western Montana region that apparently around 15% or so of Montanans, particularly those served by cooperatives, happen to fall below the poverty level. I'd love to know from the Flathead perspective, what is the responsibility of an electric cooperative to keep those costs down and make sure that electric rates stay as low as we can keep them?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Austin. That's really, really important. Our area is experiencing just some incredible growth and increasing costs of almost everything. I'll point to housing in particular here. It's, very, very close to impossible for a lot of our population to purchase a home and even to rent a home with the current prices. We view it as our responsibility to make sure that there's some stability in electric rates and hopefully that, not contribute further to some of the really significant economic challenges facing our populations, that are the most at risk at this point. Montana has the highest residential sector per capita energy consumption of any state, and that's driven by a lot by our extreme weather that we experience here. So that makes this even more important. We're talking about a lot of energy consumption, especially in those really cold winter months. So making sure that we can keep our electric rates affordable is really critical for the communities that we serve.
And I know that we've talked in the past about extreme weather in Montana. I think the last time that we recorded together, we had a pretty entertaining conversation, I think, in terms of, folks making the move out that way, especially during the, COVID, kind of height of COVID pandemic years. And, loving it in the summer, then coming to maybe think twice about it when winter comes around and those really low negative temperatures kick in. In terms of the value of the hydropower system itself, we are seeing a lot of extreme weather events where even maybe the typical real cold temperatures we would see in a place like Western Montana are being pushed to maybe a more extreme end of the spectrum. And we know that during times like MLK weekend this past January, that we've seen some, real significant region-wide impacts that not only result in higher costs and higher electric usage, but also result in some real reliability challenges. For Flathead Electric, going through that event or events like this in the past, how important was it to have the hydro system to back generation in the region and make sure that we had access to some firm but flexible energy to meet our needs during that time?
I mean, the importance of that really cannot be overstated. We were dealing with dangerously cold temperatures in our area. We set multiple low temperature records, negative 33 degrees Fahrenheit. We're talking about really, really, really extreme cold temperatures, where people die without power. And we were pushing our own distribution system to the max. Not only did we have record low temperatures, we also had a record high loads to deal with during that event. And we absolutely have to have that base load generation to keep our grid reliable during those events. When as there was almost no wind generation and no solar generation during any of those peaks because it was dark. And so yeah, it's critical. It's critical.
As we wrap up here, the last question I have for you is, I guess, to just let you have the floor. Is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know in terms of getting all the information out there about what we're trying to accomplish through this effort to support this bipartisan language, or even just for that matter, really the effort to continue advocating for our hydropower system and making sure that we have access to these resources for generations to come?
I would just end by reminding listeners how fortunate that we are to have access to this resource in the federal hydropower system. I really truly believe that federal hydropower and its affordability and its reliability have made it possible to live in challenging areas like ours, right? We can withstand the more extreme weather and some of the other economic challenges, thanks in no small part to the affordable, reliable, and carbon-free hydropower that we are so fortunate to have access to. And as we look into some of the significant challenges that face our industry into the future in terms of both reliability and cost, protecting these existing resources is increasingly more important, and we should be taking a really serious look at the impacts of changing those operations or making those operations less effective, or heaven forbid, removing any of those projects. I can't even imagine at this point. So I guess that's where I would leave it. We're very, very lucky to have the hydropower that we've got today.
Well, I'm at least in agreement. I hope that many of our listeners find themselves in the same position. And once again, I really appreciate the time that you made to join us today. And also just, sincerely appreciate being able to capture the perspective of one of our members and Cooperative doing incredible work in their community. And we always love to, make sure that we're sharing your story and sharing your perspective in terms of where the value is in our hydropower system and why folks are going out of their way and making such a big push to advocate for this system and to push for efforts like, in this case, a legislative effort to make sure that we have those protections in place. So really thank you for your time, and hopefully our listeners are able to gain some really valuable information from your insights.
Thanks, Austin.
Well, Chris, it's great to talk to you and share your story with our listeners. I'm really excited to have you on here today.
Yeah, Austin, thanks for having me. Likewise, excited to be here.
Well, to get us started off, I think the best thing to do is kind of take our more usual approach to the podcast. So tell us a little bit more about the Flathead Food Bank and the community that you serve.
Yeah, Austin, thanks for asking. So, I have the privilege of being the executive director here. Great staff, wonderful volunteers, and we get to serve an absolutely amazing portion of our population here in the Flathead Valley. So, as many people might know, if they're from the area, we've seen kind of the typical housing prices have gone up. We've seen an inflation in food. A lot of our clients are just kind of getting squeezed from all different directions. On a yearly basis, we see over about 6,000 individuals who come into our pantry. We also work with a lot of kids as well. We're in 19 different schools. We serve about 14,000 what we call backpacks. So food that goes out to kids that might not have food on the weekend. And kind of our typical client would be, well, I don't know if there's a typical one, but it's people that are just above, that poverty level, and then a life event happens. So there's, a death in the family, somebody gets sick, somebody gets hurt at a life event, it dips them into poverty and they end up here at the food bank.
So in terms of the sensitivity that those kind of folks have to rising costs, I mean, maybe you could speak to that a little bit more, how much, as you mentioned, it takes maybe just one tragedy to put somebody in that position. I imagine, it doesn't take much in terms of a rising bill or something like that to make things even that much tougher. And obviously energy costs are a big part of that, right?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think most people kind of gravitate towards those shock and awe answers where sometimes it is a car crash or sometimes it's a sickness, but a lot of times just kind of like you talked about, it's food costs have gone up, or in this case, if energy costs go up, really if anything goes up, it affects our customers. A couple different statistics that I've been thinking about lately. We just did a big survey of a lot of our clients, and over 11% of our clients responded that in the last 12 months, they had to cut the size or forego giving one of their children a meal because of the situation they were in. So again, you think about how beautiful but desperate our clients are. Only 13% of them responded that they were able to eat a balanced meal on a daily basis. And actually, one of our questions that we had was, what happened that made it necessary for you to utilize a Flathead Food Bank? Over 32% of our clients responded that there had been an increase in the cost of gas, fuel, or other energy, methods that they use. So, the margins are razor thin. So if anything goes up, even a small percentage, that can put someone over the edge.
And when we're talking something that could be 10, 15, 25, who knows in terms of those kind of percentages, those are a big deal.
Oh, they really are. And I always try to tell people, just imagine, another statistic that jumped out to me is, out of the clients that we surveyed, 21% of them said that they were foregoing prescription pills that they needed. 42% said that they weren't able to get the medical need because they can afford it, and 63% can afford dental care. So in a real practical sense, I mean, there's only so many dollars left at the end of the day for our clients. And, if they're down to the point where they're saying, do we feed our children? Do I get that prescription I need? And then all of a sudden, if they get their energy bill or they go to the gas pump and that's increased an extra $20, $30. I mean, it's not even fun for myself, but again, the margins are so thin for these people that an increase in electrical costs could very well mean, they have to skip another prescription, or now they're definitely not going to see the doctor.
And that's certainly something that I don't think anyone is in favor of. I mean, it's not a choice that we want people to have to make at the end of the day.
Oh, exactly. Yep. And that's kind of the way I look at it. We always kind of look at almost like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where, hopefully we can get people prescription drugs, food, energy, you name it. But, when these prices of energy and other things start to go up, that's normally, something has to be cut, and it's normally not something we want our people to go without.
We've also talked a lot on this podcast, and even on this episode of this podcast with some of the other guests we've interviewed, that in addition to costs and the concerns that we have about, raising energy prices, we're also equally concerned about making sure that we can buffer ourselves against extreme weather events and the impacts of climate change. And it's something that we talk a lot about in terms of, a hydropower, or like a energy reliability perspective. But just in terms of overall impacts, I'd be really curious to hear how an extreme weather event, particularly miserable cold snap or a really hot dry spell, can put further pressure on the folks that you're serving.
Yeah, definitely. Good question. And I mean, if you're from the Northwest, you probably get it. If you're listening to this podcast and you're somewhere else, I mean, lightning storms all the time, heat waves like you're talking about with -30 or something last January is just miserable. And without that option to get us back up and going back on the grid, it causes all sorts of problems. We're really reliant on our coolers and freezer systems, and those are all ran off of electricity. So again, we're serving close to 10,000 individuals a year. People, a huge percentage of our population that's relying on us. So if our freezers go down for a long time, we've got tens of thousands of dollars worth of food that could potentially go bad. We also work really closely with a lot of other nonprofits where they provide shelter, for example. So again, without electric heat, they're in a world of hurt. And then a lot of our clients that come in, they don't even have ways to cook their food without electricity. So it's just at an organizational level, valley-wide in a lot of ways. And again, just very basic stuff, preserving food, giving our clients a way to cook, to stay warm. So it's it's pretty devastating when we lose power for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, they're basic needs that I think obviously so many of us can take for granted. But when you're actually in a position where those basic needs aren't as guaranteed or secure, I'm sure it's definitely a really uncomfortable position to be in, and something that we don't want anybody to have to go through.
Well, and that's just it, and it's okay for me as a homeowner. I mean, it's not great, but especially here at the food bank, I mean, when there's a day when we're without power, luckily our local branch, Flathead Electric, they're always good at getting us right back online. But I mean, just being blunt, if we were without power for an extended period of time, we'd be in trouble. It'd be a huge cost to us, and we wouldn't be able to serve our already vulnerable population.
Now, whether people are listening from Flathead or the Northwest or really anywhere else, I think all of us are in a similar position that to some degree we have vulnerable people in our communities. Every community has a portion of the population who is in a less favorable position. And I'm sure that there's lots of people out there listening who would love to know what they can do to be more supportive and what they can do to help out. So for, supporting the food bank, for example, whether that's the Flathead Food Bank or maybe another food bank out there, what can people do? How can they get involved?
Yeah, great question, Austin. I appreciate you asking that. I would really say two things. First one, we'll do a little bit easier one. For us personally, if you go to flatheadfoodbank.com, that's our webpage, and we're also looking for everything from donations of money to, volunteering. So if you're in the area and you'd like to come volunteer, you can make a gift. We would absolutely love to have it and put it to good use. The other thing that I would throw out there as well, which really relates to this show, is as you're looking to get involved in whether it's a grassroots movement, you're talking to your local politicians, be a lobbyist for us because again, if the cost of energy goes up, even if it's $10, $20, $30, that's a huge impact for us and our clients. So if you can make a $20 gift to us directly, great. If you can help us join this fight to make sure that our clients and ourselves have access to affordable energy, that's huge. And it will help people get back up on their feet and actually, limit the amount of people that are coming to the food bank.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on today. And I just have one last question for you, which is to give you the opportunity to let us know, is there anything else you'd like our listeners to know? Anything that, while we've got you on the podcast that you want to make sure that, we get the message on?
Yeah, I would say just get involved, whatever your passion is, whether it's feeding people, whether it's, poverty alleviation, reach out to your local electric company, reach out to your electric or your local food bank, and get involved. If you're like me, I'm always thinking, oh man, I'm so busy, I'm so tired. Do I have time to volunteer? Can I join a cause? And I never feel like I do. And then when I do, at the end of the day, I go, man, that was worthwhile. I need to start doing that more. I'm glad I did. And it's how it happens. These things don't just magically happen, whether it's a food bank or making sure we have access to affordable electricity. But so many of these things are driven by communities and community members. So please get involved.
Well, thank you for that message, and thank you for making the time today. It's really fantastic to talk to you, and I hope that our listeners get to learn a lot about what you do, what the food bank does, and just really appreciate the conversation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Austin, thanks for having me. Thanks for the work you guys are doing as well. It's an honor and a privilege to be on.
Thanks for sticking around and listening to what our guests had to say today. Legislation itself may not be the most compelling topic in and of itself, but the downstream effects of public policy can dramatically alter our everyday lives, for better or worse. And everyone on today's podcast, including myself, is working towards better outcomes. Many of us have at some point struggled with costs, are currently struggling, or know someone who's going through a hard time. And it doesn't take much to tip the scales. Both local food banks and public utilities are excellent places to look for opportunities to support others in need within your own community, and we always encourage you to engage with them if you're able to. Now, as promised, we also want to make sure that you have the resources and tools to take action on public policies that protect clean, affordable, reliable hydropower and keep energy costs as low as possible. Actions like our cost cap legislation that we've been asking for support on. To do so, go to nwriverpartners.org/take-action and sign up for our newsletter today. We'll let you know when and how you can get involved moving forward without crowding your inbox full of unnecessary emails in the process. You can also get in touch with us via our contact form on nwriverpartners.org or by sending an email to info@nwriverpartners.org. We really do take the time to read your emails and have conversations, so don't hesitate to reach out. Finally, we always kindly ask that you submit positive reviews on your favorite listening platform and subscribe to the podcast to help boost our rankings and grow our audience. You can also just share DAM with friends and family to get them listening. Lastly, be sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes, which release every other Friday. And you can always find us on social media at nwriverpartners.org on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, and X. Thanks again for listening to this very special episode of Dam. And be sure to stay tuned as we continue working hard on this issue and much more. Until next time, see ya.